Yu-Gi-Oh cards have gotten kind of complicated over the years with the multiple amount of effects they have. So in this list, we'll only go over good cards that are not banned, which only have one effect total. And at number 10, we have 1 for 1. This is a spell card which has the effect where you can send one monster from your hand to the graveyard to special summon any one level 1 monster from your hand or deck. Now, special summoning monsters from the deck is one of the best places to bring them out from. That's why they don't have cards like this for all the other levels, and it was supposed to be kind of restricted by the fact that it only works on the lowest level monsters in the game, which are generally pretty weak, but even when this card first came out, it was useful to bring out level 1 tuners to go into synchro plays, like Glow-a-Bulb. It just kind of never stopped being useful over the years, because occasionally archetypes will have a card that's level 1 which is crucial to make in their plays, like Spirals with Spiral Quick Fix, or more currently with Dragon Link and use it to bring out Black Metal Dragon in order to link it off to search out Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon. This card is currently limited to 1 copy because being able to special summon a monster from the deck is really good, even if it's an inherent -1 in card advantage, because giving up 2 cards to bring out 1 from your deck is definitely worth the payoff, and I don't see it coming off the limited list anytime soon. And at number 9, we have Monster Reborn. This is another card that's limited to 1 copy, and the only other card on this list that is restricted on the ban list in any way, and it simply has the effect to special summon 1 monster from either player's graveyard. Now, Monster Reborn was strong enough to be banned for a couple of years, and there's a lot of really strong cards on the ban list that only have a single effect, and it's generally because the single effect is just really overpowered, like being able to draw 2 cards with no cost. Monster Reborn is also really good, but it's an inherent 1 for 1 trade that is useful in pretty much any deck that likes to bring out cards from the graveyard, which is most decks in the game. But surprisingly, Monster Reborn is not played in every single deck in the game, because some decks are so good at getting cards out of the graveyard that they don't need it. Even so, it still sees a lot of competitive play and is kind of a staple in Zodiac and Dragon Link decks as just one more combo piece in order to further their plays, as those cards are all about using singular cards in the hand to further advantage, especially Dragon Links. And at number 8, we have Torrential Tribute. This is a trap card which was released in one of the earliest sets of the game and simply has the effect that when a monster is summoned, you can destroy all monsters on the field. So it's a full board wipe if a monster is summoned, and was limited on the ban list for a long time because that's a pretty good effect. It was eventually taken off the ban list completely though, since the effect wasn't that good at keeping up with the metagame, and it was power cut by a lot more stronger trap cards, but it still keeps seeing competitive play nonetheless, because that simple effect is pretty strong. One of the problems with trap cards is that you have to set them and wait a turn before you can use them, or that their activation requirements are too restrictive and they can be destroyed before you ever get a chance to activate them. Torrential Tribute kind of falls into the latter category, but its activation requirement can be activated as soon as your opponent summons a single monster, and can be used in response to some popular monsters trying to destroy it, like maybe a Nightmare Phoenix, or a Tornado Dragon before it gets its effect off, and is only a sitting duck to spell trap card removal from spell or trap cards, which means it's still surprisingly relevant into the modern game, but only really in trap-heavy decks. Decks that are very combo heavy don't really play trap cards, and there's lots of better trap cards that they'd play before Torrential Tribute. So in trap heavy decks, like some variants of Eldritch and Paleozoic Frogs, Torrential Tribute fits in pretty nicely, especially since it now has a new search card which doubles as protection for water monsters on the field, which makes them even better in Paleozoic Frogs. Though, it definitely sees more play in Eldritch, who don't use the new search card for it at all, and can take advantage of their trap monsters to summon them during their opponent's turn in order to force the activation of Torrential Tribute whenever they want, in order for a full board wipe as a disruption effect. And at number 7, we have Fossil Dig. This is a spell card that allows you to add any level 6 or lower dinosaur type monster from your deck to your hand, and has always been kind of one of the best type searchers in the game, because it has such a wide level range in the cards that it can search out. Although since it only searches out dinosaurs, it was never very heavily played. That was until they released the new wave of dinosaur support, and dinosaurs has become a lot better and even a constant force in the metagame, where Fossil Dig is kind of an auto-include just because it allows you to search out the dinosaur card you want easier, since all of the main combo starters are a card you want in your hand and are level 6 or lower. Fossil Dig is just a straight up better version of Reinforcement to the Army, since it has a wider level range that it can search from, and Reinforcement to the Army is also really good, and currently limited to 1 copy. But also, Fossil Dig sees more play because dinosaur decks see more play than warrior-centric decks in the metagame right now. And Fossil Dig isn't limited at all, or at least not for now. And at number 6, we have Link Spider. This is a Link 1 monster with a downward pointing arrow, the best arrow you can have on a Link 1 monster, only requiring 1 normal monster as its material, and has the effect where once per turn, you can special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your hand to a zone this card points to. And for a Link monster with a singular effect, it's actually been quite impactful in the meta. Link Spider, along with Link Karibo, are kind of responsible for tokens being so good at Link Klein combos when Link monsters were first introduced, even if they're not used as much as they used to be, as now the meta has kind of shifted to using tokens for synchro plays after the Master Rule revisions. Although Link Spider is still used, just not with tokens as much as it used to be, funny enough. Link Spider sees the most amount of play in Paleozoic and Eldritch decks, because the Paleozoic trap cards are treated as normal monsters while on the field, and the Eldritch cards treat themselves as normal monsters while on the field. And Link 1 monsters are just very valuable for Link climbing, and in fact, they could probably lower the power level of Link monsters in general if they just got rid of all Link 1 monsters in the game. Now, the decks that mainly use Link Spider don't really use its effect at all, and kind of only use it because it can convert a normal monster on the field into an effect monster for Link materials, or to convert a normal monster into a Cybers type monster in order to go into other Link monsters that might require type matching, or a Cybers monster for something, but mainly for its ability to convert a normal monster into an effect monster, as most Link monsters require an effect monster as one of their materials. So because it technically has an effect, that's very valuable for the card, even if that effect is not used. And at number 5, we have Foolish Burial Goods, which is surprisingly played more than the original Foolish Burial that is limited to 1 copy. And since I'd like to group up similar cards in this list, I'm only going to be talking about Foolish Burial Goods. And the reason Foolish Burial Goods has been seeing a lot of play recently is because what the card does is allow you to send 1 spell or trap card from your deck to the graveyard. And Virtual World decks have spell and trap cards where almost all of them have a graveyard effect. And more specifically, Virtual World Gate Quinglong, who allows you to search out a Virtual World monster with its graveyard effect. So Foolish Burial Goods in that deck is basically a search of one of their monster cards, which is valuable enough for it to see play in pretty much all Virtual World decks. And Virtual World decks have been seeing a lot more play because they can go into True King of All Calamities pretty easily, with how good they are going into level 9 monsters. And True King of All Calamities is kind of broken, as it allows you to lock your opponent out of using monster effects for a turn. I wouldn't be surprised if it was banned sometime in the future. Foolish Burial Goods has also just seen play historically over the years in a whole bunch of other decks, as it can also just be used generically if you have Metal Foes Fusion in your deck, as this turns Foolish Burial Goods into basically Upstart Goblin, as you can use Foolish Burial Goods to send Metal Foes Fusion from your deck to the graveyard, then use that card's effect from the graveyard to return it to your deck in order to draw 1 card. It's an excellent way to get extra spell cards in your graveyard if you're trying to increase the spell card count for like a Magical Explosion FTK, or if you're playing Sky Strikers, where they like to have at least 3 spell cards in the graveyard. And at number 4, we have DD Crow. This is a hand trap that allows it to send itself from your hand to the graveyard in order to banish 1 card from your opponent's graveyard. And this card sees a lot of play for the same reason Foolish Burial Goods and Foolish Burial see play, because people like to put cards into the graveyard in order to use graveyard effects, and DD Crow can allow you to remove those graveyard effects before they're able to activate. And also, DD Crow is not a hard once per turn, which is why it's played so heavily even though it's been power crept by cards like Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion is a hand trap that allows you to negate the activation of a card if it interacts with the graveyard in some way, but is a hard once per turn. And just a note, a hard once per turn technically counts as a second effect. So none of the cards on this list have hard once per turns because that would count as having 2 effects instead of 1. Kind of. That's what I went for this video anyway. DD Crow was also just one of the first hand traps that saw competitive play, and is kind of the originator of using hand traps at all. That and Effect Veiler, because before DD Crow and Effect Veiler there wasn't too many useful hand traps. And DD Crow could be used in response to an opponent's Monster Reborn or Call the Haunted, in order to remove that target before it had a chance to resolve its effect. So even though there are better effects than DD Crow in the modern metagame, it still continues to see play because it's still really good at stopping graveyard effects by just removing targets before they have a chance to resolve, and can be played alongside Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. And at number 3, we have Skullmeister. This is another hand trap which can only be activated when your opponent activates a card effect in the graveyard, where you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to negate that effect. Skullmeister also sees a whole bunch of competitive play for the same reason as DD Crow, because its effect is not a hard once per turn and can be played alongside Ghostbell and Haunted Mansion. In fact, most of the time Skullmeister is played alongside DD Crow and they just exclude Ghostbell and Haunted Mansion entirely. That way they don't have to worry about the hard once per turn limitation on the card at all. But funny enough, even though Skullmeister was also released early on and around the same time as Effect Veiler and DD Crow, it did not see anywhere near as much play as those two cards over the years, and has only really started to see heavy competitive play recently. Generally, the hard once per turn is not that big a deal, unless you really want to shut down graveyard effects, and you draw multiple copies of them in your hand. Skullmeister and DD Crow allow you to use all of those effects without worrying about the other dead copies in your hand. And that's about it. You would think Skullmeister is played because it has higher stats, or because it's also a dark type and everything, which is true to an extent, but really, if Ghostbell and Haunted Mansion didn't have a hard once per turn, I can almost guarantee DD Crow and Skullmeister would see a lot less play. And at number 2, we have Effect Veiler. This card has a lot of text, but technically only has one effect, since it just has a whole bunch of text describing when the effect can be used, which is during your opponent's main phase only, then describing how you use the card as a quick effect to send it from your hand to the graveyard, then describing the effect itself, which is to target an effect monster, negate the effects of that card, and detailing how long it negates the effect, which is until the end of the turn. It doesn't have an extra effect to give it a hard once per turn or anything else, just a lot of text to describe one effect. And generally, Effect Veiler has seen competitive play ever since it came out, because being able to negate monster effects during your opponent's turn is really good at disrupting plays. It's also situationally useful as a tuner monster, so you can go into synchros or be summoned with Crystron Halki Fibrax. Although the card was power crept when they released Infinite Impermanence, which is just a better card at negating monster effects. But Effect Veiler continues to see play, because sometimes decks just want to play more copies of Infinite Impermanence, so they use Effect Veiler to kind of supplement that. And at number 1, we have spell and trap card removal cards, or more specifically, Cosmic Cyclone. Cosmic Cyclone is a quick play spell card, which simply has the effect to pay 1,000 life points to target one spell or trap card in the field and banish it. It's a very simple one-line effect, and is really good because it allows you to remove spell and trap cards without activating most of their floating effects, as very few spell or trap cards have floating effects that activate when they're banished, which is why it's the number 1 most used spell and trap card removal in the game. At the moment, anyway. Twin Twisters and Harpy's Feather Duster are also both heavily used spell and trap card removal cards that also only have one effect. And both of those cards can remove more spell and trap cards. So really, all 3 of these cards are excellent spell and trap card removals. I just kind of lumped them all together because I didn't really need to explain why destroying your opponent's spell and trap cards is good 3 separate times in the video. If your opponent has something like Mystic Mine on the field, or another Floodgate like there can be only one spell or trap card removal is going to make it so you can continue to play the game, and they're almost mandatory to have in your side deck just in case you run against someone who's running oppressive floodgates. Alright, and that's the list. There's a lot more cards in the metagame that use tons of effects, and there's still a lot of cards that see play that only have a singular effect, even if most of them are spell or trap cards or situational hand traps. As always, if you think I missed any really important cards, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one.